Hello, and welcome to all listeners to the Gen Z podcast for generational change, where we give you a weekly topic of what we have learned, what we have researched, and our opinions and how it affects us. So, without any further ado, I am CJ, he, him, 24, and I'm accompanied by.
My name is Nolan. My pronouns are he, him. I am 19.
And.
Good evening. I'm Sam, 22, also he, him. And
Yeah, and I'm Christina, she, her, and I'm 21.
As well as.
Hi everyone, I'm Brayden, 18, he, him.
And
I'm Mallory. My pronouns are typically she, and I live in South Florida, and I am not under 21.
So, yes, for everyone that is here to tune in on today's topic, we are going to be talking about the increase of anti-LGBT, specifically T, transgender legislation that has been passed in the recent months. We're going to be talking first, though, on giving us a baseline of some information on just transgenderism and dispelling this on that. So first, we have Christina to talk about that.
Yes, so I just wanted to start off with two common misconstructions of information, aka myths, and what they're actually known for. So the first myth is that only a minority of children who are diagnosed with gender dysphoria remain gender dysphoric as adults. And the information that I have gathered is from medical transitions. CJ just pulled up a source as well that also describes social transitions. But from my information, numerous published studies have noticed that detransition is rare with those who began transitioning in adolescence and are the least likely to transition of all the age demographics that medically transitioned in these studies. And for CJ's source that was about social transition, 95% of those who socially transitioned actually remained and did not detransition per se. And once again, everyone's transition is different. And just want to see if maybe Miss Mallory can go over and see what she has to say about it on her experience.
Well, thank you. So I guess that what we should do for the sake of understanding why in the world would I be here? I'm Gen adjacent. I'm a friend of Jen's, and I am in South Florida. And the reason that I was invited to come here tonight is because I actually am trans. I transitioned as a young person. I am an adult, but forever young at heart. And so I'm hoping to be able to lend my perspective from my own lived experience and from maybe the experiences of others that I have known. Of course, that will all be anecdotal. But thank you guys for having me tonight. So I'm sorry. Can you just remind me what was the prompt, and then I will
Yes.
do my Thank you.
Absolutely. So we're talking about the ratio of transitioning and detransitioning in youth, both medically and socially.
And so we're talking about, I think the figures were 95%.
Yes.
Of people who are essentially, I guess, under 18 who have taken steps to medically transition do not engage in something that we might call a detransition. Is that right?
So the 95 was for social transitions. The medical one did not provide an exact number just because I had multiple sources that had different ones.
And the rate, by the way, is specifically of children who are under the age of 12. It was 94% of youth had transitioned and stayed within their transition. So the main point for me bringing up that part of the article is just saying, like, the premise of oh, well, children are being indoctrinated toward this, or believing in that. It tends to be, there are people that find that they want to transition very early on, and this study looked at them when they transition at like, again, socially, age 6, age 8, age 10,
Sure.
age 12, and then 5 years later tracked to see if they were still wanting to be of that gender. And that was correct.
Right.
And just saying if there was anything, either from experience that you know of, experience that you have, or any other data or comments that you want to bring into that.
Well, I think that it's really important that we focus in on the words want versus need, because when someone is very young, and I think that we can all kind of think back to our own very early formative years. If there's something that is our true heart's desire, something that we feel very strongly about, those kinds of things typically stick with us for our whole lives. And I think that this is particularly true when you're talking about someone of a young age asserting their identity. We do so in so many different ways, but we all know that how we express ourselves in terms of gender, it flavors everything else, almost everything else that we do in our lives. So I think that it is very easy for me to those figures do seem to be quite credible. If you have a child who is communicating with their parents and saying, "Hey, this is who I am, and this is who I need to be, and this is how I need my life to go." It's not to minimize the experiences of those who end up transitioning later in life, but I have to say there's something particularly um, genuine in my experience, seeing young children who are bearing their souls to their parents and to those around them that they know, and saying, "This is who I need to be." And so I am of the opinion that those children do need to be supported. Um, and I think that, of course, that those transitions need to be overseen by medical professionals. But that's what I'm thinking. What do you guys think?
Yeah. So the main thing of bringing this up is, again, we're going to be talking about a lot of things with transgenderism and the laws that are attacking the community and these people. But we just want, or at least for me, I absolutely just wanted to say that it's like, yes, these are just humans that want human rights, and to try to have the state come in to legislate against it, I believe is very, very harmful. And I just want, and as
Yeah.
part of that, it's just establishing a baseline. It's like, hey, this big boogeyman to address directly. Oh, these, the young children, that's what we need to worry about before ramping it up and up and up. Even in that case, it is still a falsehood boogeyman archetype. So that's the part that I want to let the audience know of before going into the discussion forward. Anything from Nolan, Sam, and Britton?
I think it's important for the people to understand because education is fatal to bigotry, I feel like. And so the most important thing is to educate people on what the process actually looks like for trans youth, which I think very few people who aren't already entrenched in that world of the science really understand. So maybe Mallory, as somebody who transitioned at a young age, can speak to what does that entail before the age of 18, and that if a child expresses that desire, then what does that entail from a medical perspective, like when you go to the doctor?
Well, I think that we all can understand the way that medical treatment works in this country, and particularly pharmaceutical treatment, which is a cornerstone of transition or evolution, as I prefer to say in my case, is always it has to involve a doctor. It has to, because we're not able to go to the pharmacy and say, "Hey, I want this and this and this antibiotic, this antidepressant or this painkiller." So I will speak from my own experience. my my steps in terms of my own evolution took place around the time that I was 17 going on 18. And so at that point in time, this was around 1999, 2000. And at that point, I could barely even find a doctor to treat me in terms of my hormones and regulating my hormones. So I think that it really is, like you were saying, I think that we're making mountains of molehills just because we have some doctors in this country who are actually taking a step back and taking a second look at the issues relating to gender identity in young people. Whereas since time immemorial, we've had most doctors in this country, I guess around the world as well, who would, instead of leaning in on this, would say, listen, I don't want to get involved. And that was the story whenever I was coming up. In Broward County, I think that there might have been one or two doctors in the whole county who were willing to write prescriptions and who were willing to treat young people or just trans people at all in terms of regulating their hormones around that time. And we're now 23, 24 years later. And so I think that the more doctors who were involved and who are taking a look at this, the better. That makes me very happy and very pleased that these young people are being able to, with medical professionals, being able to exercise their decisional privacy and their bodily autonomy, which is enshrined in the First Amendment. Actually, it's in the Bill of Rights. So that's the First
Pursuit
Amendment.
of happiness.
Right.
First Amendment is speech, but
yes. Yes, but see that freedom of speech is actually more broad, and it's freedom of expression.
Yep.
And part of freedom of expression is decisional privacy, bodily autonomy. And so, and I think that it's really important for us to, and I'm sure that we can discuss this later, but those rights are not curtailed just because someone is under 18 or because they are a child. And that is something very important for us to look at from the legal context and the human rights context.
Yeah.
For these children.
And a part that we wanted to get onto as far as like how did these anti-trans laws start to come up with, there was actually a Mother Jones article that was talking about leaked emails and other conversations that Sam's gonna go over for us here about what the findings were, because this has been something that has been orchestrated, and while normally it's, oh, well, that's just conspiratorial, oh, you're being paranoid, it's like this is information that has come out. So Sam, if you want to talk with us. Yep.
The Mother Jones piece does discuss a lot of the state by state legislation that's being pushed, or it sort of breaks it down into the different classes of legislation because so many states are pushing variations of the same thing. But one of the big pushes is from an organization called the Eagle Forum, which was actually founded by someone named Phyllis Schlafly way back in the 50s and 60s. She was a huge anti-gay activist back in the day. And another group called the Alliance Defending Freedom. So, them and groups like the Heritage Foundation, these are largely right-wing evangelical-based sort of anti-LGBT and I guess probably other anti-civil rights legislation. They sponsor a lot of this legislation. They do a lot of lobbying on this work, and they have been behind something called the Vulnerable Child Protection Act in the South Dakota legislature, but it isn't limited to South Dakota. 18 other states have very similarly worded pieces of legislation passing through their legislatures at the same time. And it essentially makes it a felony to provide gender-affirming medical care to youth under the age of 16, which is in direct contravention of the guidelines of the Endocrine Society, the American College of Pediatrics, American Medical Association, so on and so forth. Every major, medical society, and I would imagine these are mostly endocrinologists when you're talking about youth and hormone replacement therapy. So I'm curious about the level of and the surge of this legislation across the country at the state level, and not just about the felony for medical care, but also for lots of other aspects of trans life, whether it be athleticism, youth sports. We're talking about the rights of children, the rights of parents to, be part of these decisions or not, or the rights of children to be free of their parents' decisions, so on and so forth. And so, I'm just curious what everybody thinks about legislation like this. And a lot of it's passing on largely party line votes. In some cases, I believe in Utah, there was a case of Republican governor actually vetoing one of it. So Governor Spencer Cox, a Republican governor of Utah, actually vetoed one. It was not this piece of legislation, but it was legislation that was going to stop trans youth from being able to compete in school sports. And I think he vetoed that, giving an explanation saying that, the challenges and hurdles faced by trans and non-binary youth are already so high to begin with, that he just didn't really want to be adding to that in any sort of competitive sports context. And just to give context to that, one more thing I'm going to say is the Trevor Project in 2021 reported that over half of trans and non-binary youth in the United States have considered suicide at some point in their life.
And to summarize the points of the Mother Jones article, is that this recent surge of anti-trans legislation has been something that has not been out of standard lawmakers saying, I think that we should, do this, or listening to necessarily the will of the people and their constituents advocating for, we want, this bill passed, we want this protection. It has very much been the legislatures themselves working with high donor religious extremist groups, trying to get this passed and then imposing that on to the rest of the population.
Well, isn't that so often the case?
Yes, it is definitely something where, it's a consistent issue, but the main point with this is saying, like, this is not something that is even, as you said earlier, this is something that goes against the First Amendment. This goes against our founding principles, and yet is something that is being attacked because of another organization.
I think it's important for us to take a moment to talk a little bit about what actual hormonal intervention in any patient who is exploring gender identity, exploring who they are, or who are making those types of affirmations entails. And this applies particularly with young people. When someone is in puberty or they are pre-puberty, there are medications that can be prescribed to slow or to diminish the progression of puberty. And this is typically what the first step is. So imagine that you're 11, you were born physiologically male, or perceived to be male. There are steps that would be the first one that I can imagine that an endocrinologist would take, is say, listen, this young person is probably on the precipice of puberty. If they need more time to think about kind of where their life is going, who they are, where they stand on all of this, this is the first option. Then the next step is for actual hormones to be prescribed to change the hormonal profile of that patient. So I think that this is a very important thing to point out, because with young people, I don't really think that it's going to do so much damage. I'm not a doctor. I am trained though as a medical and a life sciences attorney. So I have some exposure to this, and I also have my own lived experience. But I think that it's very important for us to kind of wade in the nuance here, and to understand that the first step is not going to be to wash a young person's bloodstream with new hormones to completely change their profile. That is not the first step. The first step is typically to kind of pause puberty or their hormonal development kind of where it is, so that they don't have to necessarily have to deal with the irreversible effects that puberty can cause, such as secondary sex traits like skeletal changes, like voice changes. What are a few others that you guys can think of here? Those are the two that strike first.
Those are the two major parts. In terms of puberty blockers, the effects is it can stop or limit facial hair and body hair, deepening of the voice, broadening of shoulders, growth of Adam's apple, growth of gonads, breast development, broadening of hips, periods,
Yes.
and then and that's by gender, and then for both it is growth in height, development of sex drive, impulsive, rebellious, or risk-taking behavior, accumulation of calcium in the bones, and fertility.
Right.
Puberty blockers are typically considered very safe. There's not any known negative effects on bone development or height from taking them. As you said, is a pause, but the research is still a little bit limited due to the novelty of it, and we don't know the long-term effects until people get older. But so far, we have not seen any negative effects from long-term going on puberty. Meanwhile, the upsides are, of course, being able to be far more affirmed within your gender, not needing to have top surgery, for example, or needing to go through the distress of your body literally moving away from your perception of it,
Right.
which
Correct.
leads to a lot more happiness of the person that's able to take them. And if you choose to get off the puberty blockers because you're like, you know what, I do feel that I'm non-binary, or I do feel like actually I do feel more comfortable with my assigned gender at birth, then you will be able to still experience a quote unquote natural puberty without needing additional hormones. And that will, again, it just is a pause. It is a temporary block that slows that process. So and that is just for more information of how the process is able to work. Something that I want to continue, because what I'm trying to do is get on here is the various different bills that have been being passed, and then talking more on that and our opinions on that to get to the wider discussion. So the next part is just talking similarly to the trans ban on athletes in Utah. In the House, and this is on the federal government, that has been done by the GOP, has passed a ban on transgender athletes being able to participate. A quick note on transgender athletes in terms of their participation in sports, and we'll be able to talk more about that soon, is that currently, and this was a study from Canada, I'm forgetting the exact organization, pulling it up, but typically athletes after 1 year of being on hormone replacement therapy does have a the effects that they have over others is negligible. But by passing this law and trying to ban everyone, it's like this is going to be dead in the Senate. But what it signals to trans people is, hey, we are trying to get you gone. What it signals to women is like, hey, we will be looking into doing inspections for you if people are accusing you of doing these things. What it signifies to, sports are great for building community. Sports are great for developing just help within other people. And to try to deny them this is a little bit cruel, but that is sort of the point. Speaking on cruelty, the thing that we have pulled up here is on the next thing that we have to talk is on Florida. There's currently legislation that is being passed to try to take away parents from their children if they are supportive of their children's transition. And so for that, we have, I forget which one of the other hosts were going to be talking on that.
Right. So, again, my name is Nolan. I'm very happy to be here. And so the bill that we were just talking about, transgender, and the state taking custody of transgender minors from their parents, has to do with when the state finds out gender affirming healthcare. And, this bill, it's called SB 254. And it's in action when, obviously when transgender patients need to go to the doctor, and, obviously they're trying to, transition. And, this is a huge risk because, this is just ripping them away, basically kidnapped from, their parents, even if they're supportive of this. Opponents of the bill, including the ACLU in Florida, they argue that this legislation is unnecessary, it's unconstitutional. Not only is it extremely dangerous, but it encourages abuse and hostility from the public towards the transgender community. And I feel that that's the entire grunt of this, where we're allowing something that should be more personal to us, something that we should decide ourselves at our own pace, and we decide who's involved in it. We no longer have the power to do that. That's on the hands of the state. And whether or not we're comfortable with, other people coming into our lives and deciding whether we're allowed to, see doctors, something that should be a safe place for everyone, regardless of, sexual orientation or if you're transgender or anything like that. There's just this loss of, fundamental human rights. So that's what this House ban has says. It was just filed very recently, March 3rd. If there's anyone that wanted to add in maybe some insight on the potential implications on this, anything.
Yep, we'll be getting to the implications on everything. Again, we're going a little bit more on a speed about. But the other part is this ban, if it were to go through, would be to take children that are in welcoming and loving households with supportive parents, to rip them out and put them into the foster care system as if they were being abused in a great amount of ways. And that, I feel, is insane travesty, and it is something that is, of course, signaling to everyone who's in this community, hey, if you think that you are going to have this as a thing that might come up, then you absolutely need to leave the state and drive them out to the cheers of a certain group of people. But this is, of course, not something that is just attacking children. No, because the GOP is continuing to play their hand louder and louder with the Missouri ban. To now talk about that.
Yeah, so before I start, I do want to apologize to everyone. Normally, I and my screen look a lot better, but my computer decided to crash 2 minutes before we went live, so we have the iPhone quality. What happened is in Missouri, which obviously it's a state that's majority Republican, so Republican Assembly, Republican Senate, and Republican Governor, there's been a very strong progression of anti-trans bills being signed into law. These have been among the strictest in the entire country, and that's including extremely conservative states like Alabama or Mississippi. The most latest bill that was just, I believe, either passed by both branches of the legislature or even signed in by the governor already, essentially is a complete and total ban on any form of transitioning for youth and for minors. As I said,
Adults.
and adults too. Basically, nobody's safe at any age because the good old Republican line, oh, we're trying to protect children. Yeah, no, it's going a lot further beyond that. This is mimicking a lot of the rhetoric that has been coming out of Republicans nationwide. So, for example, at I believe it was CPAC, there was a speaker who talked about completely what he said was eradicating transgenderism, which, like, I don't even know how big of a dog whistle you can get. That's not even a dog whistle at this point. Donald Trump, for his presidential campaign, put out a video where he's calling for his new policy, which is to completely defund any governmental organization that accepts people who have transitioned at any age. So this is already happening at a state level. And I think it shows that this isn't about kids. This isn't about trans kids. This is about anyone who the Republican Party doesn't like and who doesn't deem to be their image of a model American. Because we started off, this is just about, as I said, protecting kids, stopping them from making these medical decisions, which, by the way, no kid just walks into a doctor's office, says, hey, I want to change my gender, and that's it. They get a surgery right there. No, it's an extremely long process. It's a difficult process. There are constant checks and balances along the way. It's not at all easy. Um, it's not going to stop with trans kids. It's going to go on to all trans people. We're in that progress already. And it's going to go on once, unfortunately, if this is successful for Republicans and they're able to attack the whole trans community, I guarantee you next they're going to go on to every single other member of the LGBTQ community. So if you're gay, lesbian, bi, pan, whatever, they're coming. And I feel like this is also going to progress onto racial and religious minorities. So with trans girls in sports, the argument that's always made is that they have some hormonal advantage. If you look at what the Olympics has been doing, now they're banning Black women from Africa because they have naturally higher levels of testosterone. It's going to come after everyone who isn't the image of the model Christian, white, conservative.
Yeah, and to again just speak on the Missouri. In Missouri, not only did they ban the ability to get gender affirming care for adults, again dropping that pretense of for the children, they also tried or attempted to create a registry where you would report other people for being transgender or actively practicing transgenderism to get them on a list. In Florida, we have that for colleges. If you were seeking any sort of trans care, you are now on a list. In Florida as well, and this is something that we talked on a little bit last week, there is also laws that are trying to pass that will limit your ability to wear clothes that do not coincide with your gender assigned at birth, which can also then be, oh, if I'm a trans woman and I'm wearing a dress, that is the same as being naked in front of a child, while also trying to put in death penalty laws for sexual crimes against children, which, if that is being marked as wearing a dress, is leading to, again, death. In Texas, we've also had laws where the state is trying to require you to wear clothes of your assigned gender at birth, and the continuation of this and its effects of just trying to drive a wedge all the way to the end of democracy is we also have our last part before we get into our general discussion topic of the day is in Montana. We had a Democratic House legislature in the House who happens to be trans, was talking and giving fiery speeches on the effects of anti-trans legislation that was being talked about, debated, and is expected to pass, talking about, hey, this will lead to the deaths of more trans people, that this will lead to the deaths of people, ending their own lives. And as punishment, they decided to silence her, as well as misgender her multiple times, and say that you are not allowed to speak until you apologize for what you have done, while then also, as protesters came to say, let her speak, went on to arrest said protesters, likening it to an insurrection. This is something that is continuing to ramp up more and more and more. So, with all those laws laid out, and we have only covered a fraction of the laws being laid out, I hope that we have demonstrated this is something of growing intensity and growing resentment and growing hate and despise. And the first question I want to kind of open up to the rest of us is, as the generation that grew up with being able to get married to whoever you want being normalized, as it has been to be able to grow up in an area where there wasn't nearly as much hatred or phobia between peers, just everyone's read on the situation. Because for me, it is abhorrent and terrible, and it has been surprising to me, given the circumstances of my development of the youth, but to open it up more widely.
So here in Florida, where we have a number of these pieces of legislation under consideration, including, I think, a trans bathroom bill in the schools, as well as the expansion of Don't Say Gay all the way up to like 12th grade, currently going through the legislature, where they're prohibiting any discussion of sexual orientation or gender identity. I find it interesting because I also grew up in Florida, like some of us here. And, I think back to like my high school graduation, which was almost 5 years ago, where our valedictorian actually came out as trans in their valedictorian speech. And it was received with thundering applause from, the vast majority of the audience of thousands of people. And this was something that was pre-approved by the administration. And I think about that moment and, that moment in history, as that was in 2018, being really, really pivotal, I think, as something that even 5 or 10 years before that wouldn't have been possible. And then I think now in 2023, would that be possible in the state of Florida? Would the administration be as comfortable pre-approving that type of speech? Would the reception be the same? Probably not. I think there'd be a lot more trepidation because of the environment in Tallahassee that's creating, especially when it comes to these issues of education and the public school system. And to me, that's the biggest tragedy of it all, is that we could have made this progress and then backtracked on it. And I guess because I know, Mallory, you were a rowing coach at a big private school here in Broward County, and I guess I'd be curious on your opinion. I had pulled up some sort of scientific data to dispel some myths, but I'd be curious to know your thoughts on so much of the focus of the trans youth sports debate is about, or sports in general, I guess not just youth, is on women's sports. There seems to be this notion that cisgender women are the victims in allowing trans athletes to compete. I'd be curious to know where trans men fall into this regulatory structure as well, and what trans male athletes, because theoretically, if trans women provide some sort of disadvantage to cis women, then aren't trans, by the same logic, like, wouldn't trans men be at a disadvantage to cis men? But obviously there's so many more nuances. So I'd be curious to know what you think as somebody who's coached a team.
Well, I mean, I think the thing that I would want to start out saying here is that in my opinion, in my own lived experience, athletics and being able to take advantage and be involved in the things that you're interested in as a young person is very, very important to your coming of age, to your formation as a well-rounded individual. Sports have given me discipline, and it's given me confidence. And I have to tell you that when I was a young person, I really didn't feel comfortable to play sports. And then only after I was in my 20s did I feel comfortable to be able to do that. I started out rowing in college, and then I kind of moved on to coaching rowing. I've also worked with young athletes at IMG Academy and on the other side of Florida in Bradenton. And now I'm involved in racket sports here. I play pickleball. I'm an avid pickleball player here in South Florida. And I have to say that in my own experience, and just kind of more generally with people, young people do absolutely need to have an opportunity to be able to take advantage, to be involved in the things that they want to be involved in. If that's sports, if that's art, whatever that might be. If it's becoming politically aware, like all of you, you should not be denied that opportunity. But I do think that it's important for all of us to explore and wade, and like I said before, to wade into the nuance here. And I think that and if you guys have any other examples you'd like to bring up, I'd love to hear them. But I think the first big hullabaloo in terms of trans women in women's sports was Leah Thomas. If you guys are familiar with the case of Leah Thomas. And Leah, I haven't researched the situation in any great detail, but she transitioned, I guess, around the time that she started college, and then she was competing as a swimmer, and then she won some sort of major championship or something of that. She was like a top ranked women's swimmer. This led to her beating out the person that was in second place, who was a Floridian, and Governor DeSantis like declared her the winner in Florida. I don't know. But the point is that I do think that, like, as we were talking about medical transition, I do think that there is the people who are expressing concern have a point. That it is important for those who want to engage in competitive sports to be able to they need to be able to be on some sort of relatively even footing with their competitors, and that's going to mean things like addressing their hormonal profile and things like that, and doing so for a long enough period to actually make an impact on their physicality. So I don't know. I don't know Leah Thomas at all. And I know this much about the case, but the concern is because she had a physique which was very very powerful. That this was all attributed to the fact that she was of XY chromosomes and all of that. Interestingly enough, though, I was listening to ContraPoints recently, her most recent video, and she was saying that the record that Leah Thomas broke has already been broken.
Yes.
And what's the word whenever you break a record by a cis woman?
Yes,
So,
and I can go into a little bit more detail to summarize the event.
Please go ahead.
Yeah. So what happened is that before she transitioned, was obviously competing as a swimmer in male sports, was pretty good, as in like top 10 within that area. Then once she decided to start transitioning, she was still competing against other men and did much worse, where they were like top like 50 something. And then they were able to again win that one national event, which again sparked outrage. Of that specific year, the records were done rather low, but it was used as a way to attack and vilify trans people, saying, oh, they're taking all sorts of records. However, like you said, that year was actually a particularly not great showing when it came to things, but and then was taken back by someone who's a cis. But in terms of, and this is what we have in terms of studies, is that among elite level athletes within 1 year, and granted, again, there was 36 trans athletes in college level sports. There was even less trans athletes in higher than college level sports, and this is already a very overblown issue. But
or perhaps even none that
yes.
I know of.
But
yeah, when I hear that,
okay, yeah, go ahead.
I think of this one case where for the 2020 Olympics, which, if you remember, actually held summer 2021 because of COVID, there was somebody competing from New Zealand in the women's weightlifting category, and she was a trans woman. And I remembered seeing so much outrage about it, like on all of the conservative publications. So Fox News, the New York Post, there was article after article about how, oh, this isn't fair. A trans woman who started off her career competing in men's sports is now going to be competing against other women. And there's going to be such a huge advantage, and she's going to crush them all, and it won't be fair. And then this trans woman from New Zealand got to the Olympics, went to her first lifting session, and failed. She was not good at all. No disrespect to her. I mean, all athletes have their moments where they don't keep up. But clearly this advantage that everyone was saying she would have and that would cause her to win a gold in her entire category, it never happened, because with trans people, there isn't this great, huge advantage that everyone says that there is. A trans person can go to a sporting competition and completely fail. They can be on level with every other athlete, or, maybe they're just a really good athlete and they are naturally better than everyone else. We see that Serena Williams, she's not trans, but she's better than probably any other women's tennis player of all time. So of course she's going to win every match that she's in. With trans, this is a manufactured issue because people need something to talk about. And Republicans who want to run hateful campaigns need a group that they can hate. And it's just that right now, this is the easiest target.
Well, I think that it's also, on that point, I think that it's very easy to rile people up whenever you tap into something that, such as an emotion such as disgust, or a response such as disgust. And I'm not some expert on the reaction or the response of disgust, but I was listening to a video on YouTube by a content creator who was talking about the effect of disgust and how it has shaped societies. And I really do think that is at the center of all of this. There's just, and I'm particularly talking about disgust against people who are trans women, trans feminine. There's a degree of disgust because they have been perceived that they are eschewing or rejecting the privileges of manhood. Okay, so that's the first prong. The second prong is that they are the object of revulsion by the people who are in power in the societies, in the patriarchal society that we happen to be in. I think I can fairly confidently assert that trans women and trans feminine people are not the object of most heterosexual men's desires. I have never been chased. I have never been surrounded by guys who are chasing me and asking me for my number. But I think that has a lot to do with it, and it's not something that is often talked about. But it's the closest that I can come to understanding why is this such a piece of red meat to throw out there, and to get people riled up. And it seems to be pretty plausible to me from my experience.
Do you think that? Oh, sorry.
I was going to say, on the topic of disgust or bias, I am curious to both Nolan and Christina. I again, growing up throughout my life, granted I'm originally from Los Angeles, never had any sort of disgust or dislike toward trans people because it was just a normalized thing that was around me. But Nolan or Christina, did you guys have to ever overcome like any sort of internalized homophobia or transphobia, or was it also a very much like natural occurrence for you two, especially like later on once you were in high school? So Christina first, if you have anything to say.
Yes. So for me, it was more of a conflict because my mom immigrated from Peru over here. And even in Peru, she was her own minority because she was indigenous. And so she had immigrated here, and what was instilled onto her, which was Catholicism, we never really fully followed. And so with our indigenous culture, gender is a spectrum. Sexuality is a spectrum. So there was never in my household, it was never something that I ever questioned. My mom has had an open door policy for my family members who have visited and needed some help establishing themselves in the country. So we've been welcome to our friends who were surrogates, our friends who, even my uncle who was gay and his fiance. And so it was something I never thought of. And so when I believe maybe 8th grade, 7th grade, was in school, that was like my first actual experience. When I think I was on Tumblr or something, and I noticed on social media that someone was saying some pretty homophobic things, and that was my first actual realization of, oh, why do people just, why are people like this? I just didn't know that was something that I didn't know, that a disgust or some sort of like punishment towards people that weren't necessarily the same sexual identity or same sexual orientation as you existed. So I think that with the presence of social media, I realized that I was like, oh, that's why there was so much community and that's why there was so much pride, because of these things. And so I think that it definitely wasn't until 13, 14 that I realized that there is a serious need for community and being able to moderate when it comes to stuff like that.
Sure. And Nolan, did you have any experience where, if you had a specifically like homophobic or transphobic household versus, again, just growing up in that, hey, this was a normalized thing that was part of things, and then just of any other friends, relationships that you have formed as well, where you like, basically, if you've ever had a circumstance where like, I don't know if I can talk to this person because of how they present or how who they like.
Right. So I feel like I have family. I'm Latino. I'm from Peru as well. And I have a family of 8 aunts and uncles. And we're all here in South Florida. And having a single mom and being raised by her, and, when my mom couldn't, raise me, I had my family by my side. And so I would be with my uncles and aunts all throughout my life. And, I grew a really close bond with them. And, sort of through middle school and a few times in high school, I started discovering parts of myself and discovering my sexuality. And, being Latino, my family is Catholic. And, they have, well, each of them has, a certain degree of, religiousness and, openness to, homosexuality. And it was particularly tough when I, acknowledged my feelings, because no matter how I felt, whether I wanted to brush them aside or bring them up, this was a family that I had more of a connection to um, than if I didn't have a father figure. I had more of a connection because I would always see them throughout weekends at school. They would pick me up. My mom would pick me up. We would always have big, huge barbecues and dinners on the weekends. And, it was just something I grew up with them. I grew up with them through my daily life. And, it wouldn't just be like coming out to my mom. It would be coming out to my whole family and seeing what they would say. And, and 8 aunts and uncles, there's a lot of opinions. There's a lot of opinions that could be said about you. And, part of me was trying to suppress my emotions. And I'll admit I did have internalized homophobia, saying, this isn't right. This isn't the right path for me. I tried suppressing those emotions a little bit, but, eventually emotions get the best of you. And they aren't emotions. They're, who you are. They're what you're born with. And it's not something you choose. So it was just a struggle to, come out and, face my family's feelings. And, with that, I think I had to get over that fear of, just because they're religious means that they're homophobic, or just because I view them in a certain way, that their personality that shines to me doesn't mean that they're going to take it the way I think they will. And I just had to get over my comfort zone and, show them who I was. And, that's what I think happened to me.
And of your like of people your friends in age and basically trying to talk on other people that are Gen Z, did you feel that there was anything that was specific from them where they found it, outrageous or anything on that regard, or do you find that it was pretty safe around, I guess, your fellow peers?
So are you asking whether that story was outrageous to them, or
No. So where I'm going with this is, again, trying to talk on the point of, for us, there's been a lot less of a law by law, hey, these people are the others and we need to do things to stop them, and being free from that has allowed us to have a lot more open experiences, both being open to ourselves and open to others, which has been able to destigmatize it through exposure, destigmatize it through education, and communication with each other. And to then take that and relate that to how that has us grow as allies, as that how does that grow with help, and our fears and concerns with the current legislation, because that is the next part that I want to talk about. Is these laws are again continuing to ramp up more and more. Braden touched on, like, yeah, it's going to be continuation. I am very, very concerned with it as well and completely agree, but I also want to open up to the rest of the group to talk and get their ideas on how they feel about the legislation and what they think that can be done within their side, other than, of course, voting, canvassing, and having continued conversations to discuss with others.
I just want to respond to this comment that just came in from Neo Maxim about because I think this is an interesting question, the 4 different sporting leagues, having like one for cis men, cis women, trans men, and trans women. And I feel like that, while in theory might sound tempting, I think it could actually end up having, and maybe Mallory knows more about this, could end up having more variation between those groups, or I'm sorry, within those groups than even across those groups, like the way that you might think. Like everyone thinks of maybe the testosterone spectrum might be this way for trans men, but it could end up being, more different within that group than it would be between them and like cis women, for example. Which the whole subdividing it even further, I wonder if Mallory thinks that that's
there's not enough people
or not.
There's straight up not enough people in terms of trans youth. Trans people right now is 1%. So far, I found a study where it was trans youth is at 5%. So if we assume generously, it goes to 10%, but realistically maintains around that 5% to 8% of the population. And of course, you're dividing that by 2, as well as taking in the fact that trans people, when it comes to sports, participate in sports at 15% of that population versus cis at 50%. There's just not enough people, and that's again on the point of what I was saying earlier, where there was 36 collegiate level trans athletes. You're not going to be able to make a league with that. I do forget if it's 36 of trans female versus trans on that.
I mean, and I'm even surprised. Yeah. I'm surprised at that number even today. I mean, that feels generous to me. I hope that there's 36. But I think the bigger picture, I'm concerned that doing something like that is going to just otherize.
Exactly.
All that does is it singles an insular minority out for further oppression. If for example, like if I was a tennis player, or a pickleball player, I hope it gets into the Olympics. Like if I had to only play against like other women who were trans identified, well, first of all, that's going to like absolutely out us. It's going to be extremely reductionist. And it's going to say this is the only thing that's important about you is the fact that you are not cis. So here you go. Everybody in the whole world look at this person. And then I'm going to be sitting there like with nobody to play with or play against, because there's not enough people out there to play with me. in some kind of league. And I think that is just not, it's not a workable solution in terms of the numbers and the statistics, but it's also just not fair. It's not fair because the goal should never be to otherize a group of people who are simply just trying to make their way in this world and to actualize as who they are and what they want to do and who they want to be.
Yes. Another comment on that is any legislation that you pass where you are, again, going specifically sports. I've been trying to not make it on specifically the sports topic, but if you do say, hey, we're going to bar trans women from being able to participate in sports, then it will necessarily, and this has been passed by lawmakers, allow for genital inspection checks. So if I suspect someone is a trans female, not a cis female, because they beat my daughter and I'm a very upset parent, I can accuse of it. They'll then need to provide proof. The way that they'll need to provide the proof is they'll need to go through a physical exam through a medical professional, which will be invasive to actually check to see, hey, are all of their parts the correct parts that they need to be? So yes, it is something where in theory, it makes some amount of sense. But in practice, it would not be viable. But going back to the topic earlier of talking about fears, concerns, and just like working as an ally with others, if people want to talk on that topic. So, Braden, if you had anything that you wanted to say further on, the ever expanding parts of the law.
Well, I mean, first of all, I just want to say if you're saying protect the children and you're calling for mandatory genital inspections, you're not protecting the children. You know what's going to happen. I know what's going to happen. You don't have to be an idiot to understand that. And also, something that I think is so curious is how a lot of these states, like Missouri, which is passing all of these bills in the name of protecting the children, although it's going further in Missouri, a lot of these are the same state legislatures who are refusing to ban child marriage. Now, I forgot what state it was, but basically it was like 1 week they decided to ban trans youth from being able to medically transition, and then the next week they declined to formally ban child marriage. So, I've said it before, I sound like a broken record, but they don't really care about this. I mean, obviously, the Republicans in leadership, they hate trans people, but it's, in my opinion, not more than they hate gay people or bi people or Muslims or Black people. It's just that right now they see the trans community, potentially because it is more of a smaller community compared to others. It's an easy target right now. We were talking earlier about how it's easy to rile up feelings of disgust because of the society that we live in, unfortunately. So right now it's just a matter of this is a target we have, and hey, there's going to be the least amount of opposition when we mess with these people, so let's take them first. This is going to do nothing to protect children. We talked earlier about how, look, if you ban being able to transition as a youth, that might sound good in theory, but it's going to lead to increases in mental health issues and unfortunately kids taking their own lives because they're not able to live their authentic lives. And frankly, if you want to do that, you're a disgusting human. Like, there's no way around it.
Christina, any ending, closing thoughts for wrapping up of concerns, final things to get out?
Basically just what Braden said. Also, I looked and it was West Virginia. You're right. They literally next week, the next agenda was about declining that child marriage bill that they were trying to introduce. But I honestly agree saying that if you're saying protect the children and then you're going back and saying, but wait, give me all of your medical history and let me make sure that you have the proper genitals. It's just so backhanded and it's very full of malice and hate. And I will continue to be disgusted by it. And I hope that it gets held accountable one day.
Nolan? Closing thoughts and statements?
I just agree with everything that's been said. I have nothing unique to add. But I do think that these are all really important issues that we touch upon. And I can't say that I can't agree more.
And Sam?
Yeah, I mean, my final thought would be that I truly believe that this widespread swath of legislation across the states is a backlash to what Republicans know is the inevitable case of the younger generation being far, far more comfortable with accepting trans and not gender, differences. The rates of transgender youth for the under 30 is about I think it's up to like 2%, and then 3% of under 30 who identify as non-binary, and that's compared to like in the over 50 cohort like 0.3%. So you're talking about 10-50 times increases in the proportion of people in the younger generations who are comfortable identifying that way, and they know that it's just a matter of time. And I think that that's why this legislation is being introduced so fiercely, and why it's suddenly become problematized to the way it is for still what is a very small portion of the population. And does not affect, especially with the sports thing, doesn't affect people in the not anything compared to way bigger issues in the world of athleticism, like performance enhancing drugs and just far
Concussions from football.
Yeah, or entire inequities in like the government structures of how college football and the money that gets put into that and how that gets redirected. There's so many things you could talk about with athletics, that this is just such a small portion of it. So I think that this backlash is a response to the inevitable, but it's not going to work in the end.
And then Mallory?
Sam, I think that you're hitting the nail on the head. I think in kind of the 30,000 foot view here, I think that this is just part of a generational transition. You've got two extremely large generations in this country. You've got the boomers who have kind of held power in their philosophies and ideologies. And then you've got Gen Z, which is now outnumbering boomers. It is the next huge mega generation coming along. And I'm a millennial. So I'm like one of the older millennials, but I think that this is just kind of like two storm fronts coming together, and the resolution will be, but as Sam said, this is all an inevitability. The inevitability of Gen Z is what it is. And so I don't want to say everything's going to be okay. Just like, let's just continue, because a lot of what I see does remind me of a little bit of like how things devolved from like Weimar Republic Germany in the 20s, and the early 30s to like late 30s Germany. And that scares me. But I also acknowledge that we have a massive, much more awake and informed and conscientious generation that's coming up in Gen Z, which I'd like to think I'm Gen Z adjacent. And I think that it is inevitable that the change is coming, the progress is coming, because you are going to outnumber all of us, all the other generations. And that gives me comfort.
And to add my final thoughts on this before we wrap up and talk about next week's topic, or reveal it, we like I've said, similarly to the Federalist Society episode, the reason why that these laws are being passed, that these bans are being implemented, that there is a need to have all of these put into writing to put this oppression against us, is because the tides are going in the favor of freedoms for people, of acceptance for people, of recognizing science and medicine as something that we can respect, and respecting these institutions. And it is something that is fearful to others because of change. It is something that pulls well to attack temporarily, but it is something that is continuing to bring our generation more and more involved with politics, as it does affect our everyday lives. So I am hopeful in that. I am incredibly concerned with the legislation that's being passed. And I do know people that are being directly impacted by the legislation that is being passed, and I do what I can to, assist them. But I do know overall that this is something that is something that people believe in, which is the freedom and human rights and dignity for everyone else. Now, on the topic of thinking for the children, for next week, we will be discussing the recent child labor law rollbacks, as well as being able to revisit other discussions of labor and how Gen Z is operating within the new workforce. So, thank you everyone for coming in and listening. Hopefully, you learned something new. Hopefully, we had something spelled, and hopefully, we were able to bring you some new perspective. We'll see you again next week.